You were not supposed to be here right now. Your brain was on autopilot, scrolling, consuming, half present. And then something stopped you. Not a thought, not a decision. Something underneath both of those. A pull so quiet you almost missed it. But you didn't miss it. You felt it, and you stayed. And that matters more than you know, because most people never feel that pull. They scroll straight past the exact moment that was meant to redirect them. Too deep in the noise, too locked in the loop, too identified with the version of themselves that doesn't believe anything can actually change. But you paused, which means something in you is already tuned to a different frequency. Something in you already knows that the life you've been feeling toward, the version of yourself you sense in quiet moments but can't quite reach, isn't a fantasy. It isn't wishful thinking. It is a signal, a real, measurable, energetic signal coming from a version of you that already exists. What follows is not motivation, not mindset, not another framework that sounds good but changes nothing by next week. It is the actual process, the mechanism behind every real transformation you have ever witnessed or experienced. The reason some people shift completely and suddenly while others stay stuck indefinitely doing everything right. That feeling has a name. And by the end you will understand exactly why it pulled you here, exactly what it has been trying to tell you, and exactly why this moment, not tomorrow, not when you are ready, but right now, is the most important signal your entire nervous system has sent you in a long time. Have you ever made a decision and before anything in your life actually changed, something inside you already felt different? That feeling is the entire foundation of what we are about to explore. There is a version of your life that already exists, not in some distant future, not in another dimension you will never reach, not locked behind years of effort and sacrifice and waiting. It exists now, accessible, real, vibrating at a frequency closer to you than your own breath. The reason you haven't stepped into it yet is not because you are not ready, not because you haven't worked hard enough, not because the universe is withholding something from you. It is because no one ever told you how the process actually works. They told you to think positive, to visualize, to set goals and grind and push and repeat. And you did. You tried, genuinely. But something always felt off, like building momentum and then hitting an invisible wall. Like you could see the version of yourself you wanted to become, but every time you reached for it, it shifted slightly out of reach. That is not failure. That is not a sign it isn't meant for you. That is what happens when you are using the wrong mechanism entirely. Because quantum jumping isn't about effort. It isn't about visualization. It isn't even about belief in the way most people teach it. It is about something far more precise, far more immediate. And once you understand it, once you actually feel how it works inside your own body, you will never approach transformation the same way again. Start with something that actually happened. Not a metaphor, not a spiritual concept dressed in scientific language. A real, measurable, documented phenomenon that changed how physicists understood reality. In quantum mechanics, electrons don't move the way you were taught. When an electron shifts from one energy level to another, it doesn't travel. It doesn't cross the distance between where it was and where it's going. It simply disappears from one state and appears in another, instantly, without passing through any point in between. Scientists called this a quantum leap, and for decades they struggled with it, because it violated everything classical physics said was possible. Movement without journey, change without transition, arrival without travel. And here is what is even more extraordinary. The electron doesn't make that jump randomly. It jumps when it absorbs exactly the right amount of energy. When the internal conditions for the new state are fully met, the shift happens. Not gradually, not step by step, instantly. Now hold that image, because what comes next is not poetry. It is the most accurate description of human transformation that exists. You function the same way, not metaphorically, not symbolically. At a fundamental level, you are an energetic system operating within a field of infinite potential states. And just like the electron, you don't shift gradually. You don't inch your way into a new reality. You jump. The moment internal conditions align with the new state of being, the shift occurs completely, immediately, from the inside out. The reason transformation has felt slow or impossible before is not because change is hard. It is because you were trying to move through the space between where you are and where you want to be, step by step, logically, linearly. But the quantum field doesn't operate on logic. It operates on alignment. Think about the last time something in your life changed completely and suddenly. Not gradually, suddenly. The moment a relationship ended and you felt a weight lift you didn't even know you were carrying. The moment you walked out of a job that was draining you, and the air outside literally tasted different. A single conversation that reframed everything you thought you knew about yourself. Nothing in your external world had changed yet. No new circumstances, no new evidence. But something had already shifted inside. And within days or weeks, your external reality began to reorganize around that internal shift. That wasn't luck. That wasn't coincidence. That was a quantum jump. You have already done this. You have already experienced the process. You just didn't have the language for it. You didn't know you could do it deliberately. You thought it was something that happened to you, not something you could initiate. Every quantum jump you have ever experienced started the same way. Not with action, not with planning, with an internal state that became more real to you than your current circumstances. The moment the new frequency became louder than the old one, you jumped. Now understand why most people never do this deliberately. Why they experience it accidentally, occasionally, and then spend years waiting for it to happen again. It comes down to one thing: the identity signal. Your brain is not primarily a thinking organ. It is a prediction engine. Every second it is scanning your internal state and asking one question: who am I? And based on the answer it finds, it filters your perception, shapes your reactions, and determines which possibilities in your environment even register to you. This is neuroscience, not philosophy. Your reticular activating system, a network of neurons at the base of your brain, literally filters out anything that doesn't match your dominant identity signal. You can be surrounded by opportunities that match the person you want to become, and your brain will make them invisible because they don't match who you are currently broadcasting yourself to be. This is why affirmations often don't work. You can repeat "I am abundant" 1,000 times while your nervous system is broadcasting scarcity, and the field responds to the nervous system, not the words, the felt experience, the embodied signal. The filter is not in your thoughts. It is in your identity. And identity lives in the body, in the posture, in the automatic reactions, in the emotional patterns you practice every day without realizing you are practicing them. So what does it actually mean to change your identity signal? Not theoretically, practically. What does it feel like? What does it require? It starts with understanding something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the version of you that you want to become. That person would not think the thoughts you are currently most attached to. They would not react the way you currently react. They would not need what you currently need in order to feel okay. And that means to become that person. Some version of who you currently are has to dissolve. Not be fixed. Not be improved. Dissolved. This is the moment most people retreat, because dissolution feels like loss. It feels like threat. The mind interprets it as danger. The nervous system fires. The old patterns reassert themselves and the jump collapses back into the familiar. But here is what that feeling actually is. It isn't danger. It is friction. The energetic interference that occurs when you are broadcasting a new signal while the old neural architecture is still running. It is static between frequencies. And static doesn't mean the signal is wrong. It means you are in transition. The people who jump successfully are not the ones who feel no fear. They are the ones who recognize the fear as part of the process and don't let it collapse the broadcast. There is a concept in physics called coherence. When waves align, when they move in the same direction with the same frequency, their energy doesn't just add together, it multiplies. A coherent signal is exponentially more powerful than an incoherent one. This is exactly what happens in human transformation when it actually works. Most people's internal state is incoherent. Their thoughts are moving in one direction. Their emotions are pulling in another. Their body is holding a completely different pattern. Their actions are inconsistent with all three. The signals cancel each other out, and the field responds to the net result, which is noise. Quantum jumping requires coherence. Alignment between your thought, your emotion, your physiology, and your behavior. Not perfect alignment. You don't need to eliminate every doubt or silence every fear, but your dominant broadcast, the signal that is louder than the others, needs to match the state of the version of you you are choosing. And here is the key word: choosing. Not wishing, not hoping, not visualizing from a place of wanting. Choosing with the felt certainty of someone who already knows. Most people have never been taught how to access that state deliberately, and they mistake it for what it isn't. It is not excitement. Excitement is future-oriented. It carries urgency. It implies that what you want hasn't arrived yet, which is exactly the signal you don't want to broadcast. It is not forced positivity. That is suppression, pushing down the authentic signal and replacing it with performance. The field doesn't respond to performance. It responds to genuine energetic states. The state you are looking for feels like neutral certainty. The feeling of knowing something is already handled. The way you feel about your name. You don't hope you have a name. You don't visualize having a name. You simply know. It is settled. It requires no energy to maintain. That is the frequency. The felt knowing, the settled certainty of a reality you are not waiting for, because internally, you have already inhabited it. When you can hold that state, not perform it, not pretend it, but genuinely access even a few seconds of genuine neutral certainty about your chosen state of being, the coherence begins to build. And coherence is what the field responds to. Now the part nobody talks about, because it is uncomfortable. And in an industry full of feel-good content, uncomfortable truths get avoided. The quantum jump requires you to become emotionally unavailable to your current timeline. Not detached, not numb, not dissociated. Emotionally unavailable. As in the story of your current limitations no longer has the power to pull you back into the feeling of them. Every time you engage the emotion of your problem, Every time you replay the story of why things haven't worked, every time you feel the weight of your current circumstances as if they are permanent, you are rebroadcasting the old signal. You are reinforcing the old identity. You are telling the field, this is still who I am. And the field obeys. The reason this is so difficult is that the old pattern is not just a habit. It is a survival mechanism. Every emotional pattern that keeps you anchored to an old timeline is doing so because some part of you still has something to learn from it. Some belief formed in response to an experience that felt threatening. And that belief is still doing its job, still protecting you from what it decided was dangerous. The way to complete it is not to fight it. It is to see it clearly, to name it without judgment, to acknowledge what it was trying to protect you from, and then to gently, deliberately offer it a new reference point. Evidence, even internal evidence, that the threat it was protecting you from is no longer real. This is not therapy. This is vibrational hygiene, the act of consciously removing the emotional charge from old patterns so they can no longer interfere with the new broadcast. When you locate the feeling, not the thought, the actual felt sensation in your body, and breathe into it without resisting it, without amplifying it, just allowing it to be seen, something shifts. The charge reduces, the hold loosens, and suddenly the new signal has space to become dominant. There is a moment in this process unlike anything else you will experience in personal development. Most people who have been through a genuine quantum jump describe it the same way. Everything goes quiet. Not peaceful exactly. Quiet. Like the static disappears. Like the internal noise you had become so used to that you didn't even notice it anymore suddenly stops. And in that quiet there is a clarity. A sense of already. Not yet. Not soon. Already. The thing you have been reaching for feels familiar, like it was always there, and you were just looking in the wrong direction. That is the jump point. That is the moment the field locks in. And what happens next is not dramatic. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like coming home to a place you have never physically been. A recognition so deep it almost makes you want to laugh. This is the moment everything in your external reality begins to reorganize. Not because you forced it, not because you did something specific, but because the signal you are sending is now coherent enough, clear enough, and sustained enough that the field has no choice but to mirror it back. Now understand what happens immediately after the jump, because this is where almost everyone fails. Not because the jump didn't work, because they don't understand what they are experiencing. The external world takes time to catch up. The internal shift is instant. The three-dimensional reflection of that shift is not. And in the gap between your internal jump and its external manifestation, you will be tested, not by the universe, not as punishment, by your own nervous system, which has spent years or decades calibrating to the old signal and doesn't trust the new one yet. It will look for evidence that nothing has changed. It will pull your attention toward every piece of data that supports the old story. And it will feel very, very convincing. This is where most people collapse the jump. They feel the internal shift. They hold it for a few days. Nothing dramatic changes externally. And the old brain says, "See, I told you nothing works. Go back." And they do. They return to the familiar emotional state. They re-engage the old patterns. And the timeline reorganizes back to what it was. Not because the jump failed, because the signal was aborted. The way through this window is not to force external change. It is to hold the signal regardless of external evidence. To treat your chosen state of being as a fact that hasn't fully materialized yet, but is as certain as anything you have ever known. This is the discipline of quantum jumping. not the performance of positivity, the maintenance of signal under pressure. And here is something extraordinary that happens when you do this. Reality doesn't just catch up slowly and evenly. It reorganizes in bursts. You hold the signal for days with no visible change. And then suddenly 3 things shift at once. A conversation opens a door you had forgotten existed. A person appears in your life carrying exactly the energy you had been broadcasting. An idea so clear and actionable it feels like it was handed to you. These are not coincidences. They are the field catching up, delivering the accumulated response to your sustained signal all at once. Physicists call this self-organized criticality. Systems under pressure don't change gradually. They accumulate tension silently, and then release it all at once. Avalanches, earthquakes, paradigm shifts. The external reality responds to internal coherence the same way, which means the silence isn't absence. It is accumulation. And the longer you hold the signal without collapsing it, the more powerful the burst when it comes. There is one more layer, one most people never reach, because they abandon the jump before they get here. Identity crystallization. There comes a point, if you hold the new signal long enough, where something changes in the felt sense of who you are. The new identity stops being something you are choosing and starts being something you simply are. The old patterns don't disappear, but they stop having automatic authority. You notice them, you see them activate, but you don't get pulled in. It is the difference between watching a storm from inside a warm building and standing in the rain. When this happens, when the new identity crystallizes, the jump is complete. Not the process of jumping, the state of having jumped. The new timeline stops being the destination and becomes the baseline. You stop attracting evidence of the new reality and start simply living in it. The way you live in your own name, effortlessly, naturally, without maintenance. This is the version of you that the pull you felt at the beginning was pointing toward. Not a version to become someday, not a goal to achieve, a frequency to inhabit, a signal to broadcast so consistently, so coherently, so completely, that reality reorganizes around it as naturally as water finding its level. Now make this real, because understanding this process intellectually and actually engaging it are 2 completely different things. And I don't want you to leave with more information. I want you to leave with a different internal state than the one you arrived with. Do this. Bring your awareness into your body right now. Not your thoughts, your body. Feel the weight of wherever you are sitting or standing. Feel your breath moving. Feel the aliveness in your hands. Now ask yourself one question, and don't think the answer. Feel it. What does the version of me who has already stepped into my next level feel like right now? Not what do they have, not what are they doing. How do they feel in their chest, in their posture, in the quality of their attention? Let that feeling arise, even slightly, even as a flicker, and then stay with it for just a few seconds longer than feels comfortable. Because that slight discomfort, that is your old identity noticing it doesn't recognize this state. That is the signal that you are at the edge of the jump. Stay with it anyway. That feeling you just touched, that is not imagination. That is access. That is your quantum field receiving a new signal and beginning to organize around it. And every time you return to that feeling, you strengthen the pathway. You deepen the coherence. You move closer to the crystallization point. This is the process, not a metaphor, not a spiritual concept dressed in scientific language. A real, functional, repeatable mechanism for shifting the identity signal that determines the reality field you inhabit. Quantum jumping is not something that might happen to you. It is something that is always available to you. In every moment, in every breath, in every deliberate choice to return to the signal of who you are becoming rather than the echo of who you have been. You came here feeling a pull you couldn't explain. You stayed because something in you recognized what was being said, not as new information, but as a remembering. And that recognition is not nothing. That is coherence starting to build. That is the field responding to the fact that you are no longer entirely identified with the version of you that arrived here. You are not the same as you were when you started reading this. That is not poetic language. That is the process in action. The jump doesn't require you to have it all figured out. It doesn't require you to feel ready. It doesn't require external permission or validation or proof. It requires one thing: the willingness to broadcast the signal of who you are becoming before you have any evidence that it is working. To hold the frequency of your chosen state, not because the world has confirmed it, but because you have decided it. That decision, that clear, coherent, embodied decision, is the absorbed energy the electron needed to make its jump. And you already have it. You already made it. The moment you felt that pull and decided to stay, that wasn't an accident. That was the jump beginning. The only question left is whether you will hold the signal long enough to watch it complete.